This poster explores the populist homonationalism of Geert Wilders and the PVV. We argue that affect is central to its construction above and beyond Wilders' actual political beliefs.
Populism is a thin-centered ideology based on the notion that the people are opposed to the elite. The conceptualization of populism as thin-centered demonstrates how it has no core theoretical values and can take several shapes, attaching itself to other host ideologies. This ideational approach to populism signifies its fluidity in redefining political division lines. This poster explores how the populism of PVV leader Geert Wilders attaches itself to homonationalism.
Homonationalism is a discourse that describes the ways in which LGBTQ+ communities in the West become incorporated into the nationalist and xenophobic ideologies of their societies. It can be seen as a form of assimilation into dominant national narratives in which certain LGBTQ+ identities are celebrated as part of a tolerant and modern national culture. However, homonationalism is often linked to Islamophobia, which can be best understood through the notion of racializing homophobia. Homonationalism here is deployed through a transnational frame, whereby there is an assertion made of what a contemporary homosexual's exceptional identity is in relation to an Orientalist version of a Muslim male sexuality. Here, homonationalism can be understood as a process of sexual exceptionalism, regulatory queerness, and the ascendancy of whiteness.
Geert Wilders is the founder of the Dutch far-right populist Party for Freedom, or PVV, which he set up in 2006. He is a controversial figure known for his extreme views against Islam and immigration, who has been widely criticized as racist and xenophobic. The populist homonationalism of Geert Wilders defines itself as libertarian, as it puts on a facade of tolerance and sexual liberation, whilst marking the racialized body as a site of backwardness and homophobia. Wilders has called for several racist policies, such as a head rag tax and an expulsion of all Muslims who did not adhere to Western culture from Europe, and the banning of the Quran. This he has balanced with his liberal calls for sexual emancipation and queer freedom, which functions to legitimize his exclusionary and racist rhetoric. This links to Moffat's notion of illiberal liberalism, in which illiberal attacks on Muslims and migrants more generally are disguised through liberal discourses. Moreover, this aligns with Geert et al.'s conception of demographic fever dreams, as Wilders presents himself as the heroic savior of the threatened demographic against the evil other who pose a threat to them. He projects victimhood into the figure of the queer person and thus presents himself as the heroic white savior.
We argue that Wilders uses fear and anger to mobilize the LGBTQ+ population as part of his effective populist style. Vossen documents how he entirely changed his style of speech after the formation of the PVV in 2006, as he shifted towards far-right nationalist populism, converting his language from political, technical jargon to bizarre and effective outcries, such as calling young Moroccan criminals street terrorists and Dutch Antilles crooksnests, which should be sold on eBay. This aligns with Secker and Anderson's proposition of populism as excessive, as his heightened intensity of hatred against the immigrant other in the name of the queer population mobilizes an already fearful population to vote for him. Lotta writes how members of the LGBTQ community are being bullied/enticed through fear-based politics to support populist nationalist political entities. This is a tactic which has been relatively successful, as Spearings reported that in 2010, Wilders was proclaimed the winner among gay voters based on a Gay Crank poll.
Geert Wilders tweeted a message in 2015 about the execution of 3 gay men by ISIS thugs in Syria. Wilders goes on to say that the Islamic State hates us, our values, and our way of life. Let us defend freedom. The tweet is an effective mobilization of racializing homophobia. The graphic images in the tweet are intended to stir up emotions of anger and fear towards Muslim immigrants who are fabricated as being eager to subject Dutch citizens to its rule, to strip away Dutch values and identity. In reality, the tweet is exploitative of the victims and promotes Islamophobia by stigmatizing all Muslims as intolerant, violent, and extremist. By bringing populist homonationalism into conversation with secularist nativism, we can better understand how Wilders constructs this discourse. Secularist nativism is a political ideology that seeks to defend the values and traditions of a society or nation, while promoting policies that restrict the influence of foreign cultures and religions. Secularist nativism here is associated with anti-Islamic sentiment and hostility towards Muslim immigrants whom are perceived as a threat to Dutch cultural identity and way of life. Thus, the tweet is part of a broader pattern of exploiting LGBTQ+ rights to promote an exclusionary and discriminatory version of Dutch society by fostering support for stricter immigration laws, tighter border controls, and a rejection of multiculturalism.
The homonationalist populism of Wilders is undoubtedly excessive, following Anderson and Secor in the way that its foundational views are contradictory and unstable. His actual political beliefs are difficult to pin down and do not actually matter, as the affective atmosphere he generates is so difficult to question, as demonstrated through the tweet. His vision of the Netherlands is grounded in the typical Dutch couple, which he names Henk and Ingrid, who have been humiliated and cast aside by the Dutch elite. This heteronormative image demonstrates his core beliefs, and yet Wilders is still able to deploy homonationalism through affective statements such as, "I am fighting for the freedom that gay people should have to kiss each other, to marry, to have children. This is exactly what Islam is fighting against." Moreover, this is demonstrated by the cutoff of his liberal beliefs at transgender and non-binary rights. He stated that educating children about non-binary identities amounts to a woke totalitarian dictatorship, which again would threaten Henk and Ingrid. One could even argue that if the number of non-binary and transgender individuals in the Netherlands grew, Wilders would begin to support their rights as a means of mobilizing another population to vote for him. This demonstrates the danger of homonationalist populism, as Wilders can mobilize LGBTQ+ people to vote for him without actually supporting their rights. As Lotter notes, far-right populist parties that enact homonationalist discourses quickly abandon their promises to LGBTQ+ populations after they are elected.
To conclude, homonationalist populism is a discourse which promotes the protection of LGBTQ population against the racialized homophobic other, to encourage anti-immigration policies and a rejection of multiculturalism. We argue that Geert Wilders and the PVV use affect to construct this rhetoric, as demonstrated by his extreme brash language and the violent images he circulated through the tweet we analysed. This constructs a fear and anger-based politics, which is undoubtedly excessive, functioning to mobilize LGBTQ populations to vote for him. He does this despite his lack of a real care for them as a minority group, using a liberal facade to legitimize his far-right, racist, and xenophobic beliefs. Populist homonationalism, as demonstrated by Wilders, is distinctly illiberal and dangerous, as it uses false liberal narratives at the expense of both those who are being protected and those who are being excluded.